Okay, here's where we get down to some nitty-gritty. And if you're like me, you would have enjoyed Mission Impossible when you were younger. You know, your mission, should you decide to accept it, is this: n equals 1. And what we mean by n equals 1 is that when people talk about a scientific experiment with a number of people, the n equals the number of people involved in the experiment. But in this case, we basically, n equals 1 means that the experiment you apply to yourself. So the real thing here is to treat it just as that. It's about seeing whether the ideas we've been talking about, and I'm going to lay them out more concretely so you'll know exactly what to do, whether they actually apply to you, whether they actually work, whether they prove the theory or not. And that's up to you to figure that one out. So by actually doing an experiment, I've proved it myself, thousands of others have proved it to themselves. It's up to you now to decide whether you want to accept that mission and go for it. So this is a bit of tongue-in-cheek thing about what the main instruments of mass destruction is. You probably would have started thinking about, nuclear war and climate destruction and all that kind of stuff. But really the main instruments of mass destruction are these things, and it really is time that we learned how to best use them. And so that's what we're going to teach you here. One of the things that I'm going to give you a broad outline to give you an idea of the strategy behind it all, how to actually determine your carbohydrate tolerance level and live within what I call a budget. And I've used this target as a way to bring that about. This is a kind of target I used to shoot at when I was New Zealand Intermediate Champion Archer when I was young, and so I spent a lot of time in front of a target like this, and I thought it fit these kind of figures really well. So basically the best carbohydrate strategy is if you've got no contraindications like we talked about in a previous slide, like porphyria and things like that, then start with 20 grams of carbohydrate a day. And by 20 grams of carbohydrate, I actually mean 20 grams including the fiber. Probably hear more about that later. And if the reasons to start with 20 grams a day is that 95% of people will get actually a good result with 20 grams of total carbohydrate. Remember, not net, not keep counting the fiber in there. So 20 grams total carbohydrate a day will get most people good results. And I'll teach you later about what to look for in terms of results. But what happens if that doesn't work? Well, then you may need to then go down towards 10 grams a day or even all the way to 0 grams a day. And that's basically, once you've done that, once you've got to the point where you feel like you're getting some results, that might be your waist is getting smaller, clothes are getting looser, energy is feeling better, hunger is feeling less hungry, mind's feeling clearer, all those kind of results, so less carb cravings. Then if that's all good, then the idea is to test how much carbohydrate your body can tolerate before it kicks into all those things go in reverse. And to do that, I recommend going up. And you don't have to do this. You don't have to test out your carbohydrate tolerance. At this date, I'm re-recording this in, August 2019. I've been doing this personally for about 8-9 years now. And actually 9 years. And I've done this a few times, and I've got to the point of being aware of where my carbohydrate tolerance sits, and when I go over it a bit, I can deal with that. Some people who go over it a bit, and I'll talk about this more in the addiction slides, is about how that can actually trip a switch and it'll take you months to recover. Whereas, so you've got to be careful with this idea of testing your carbohydrate tolerance, and as I said, you'll hear more about that. And by going up, let's back up. By going up 5 grams a day, I don't mean, say you've settled down to 10 grams a day as your ideal carbohydrate number, and that's where you're getting good results. Then when you start testing it, by 5 grams a day, I mean 5 grams a day for a week, like I say there. So it's not like day over day. You don't go on Monday, you don't go to 15, or on Tuesday you go to 20. On Wednesday you go to 25. you go on Monday when you're trying to increase your carbohydrate budget. I'll teach you how to do that. You go up 5 grams, you stay consistent. So if you've been 10, Monday's 15, Tuesday's 15, Wednesday's 15, all the way through till the next Monday. And that's how you work that out. So you test it that way. Try for an extra 5 grams per day, but do that for a whole week before you decide whether, it changes your hunger, it changes your carbohydrate cravings, it changes your energy, your mental and physical energy, and whether your waistline starts increasing or not. So those are some simple, good parameters to look at. And so if you are getting still getting the results you want in terms of all those things we've been talking about, then you can go all the way up to 60 or 80 grams a day if you find symptoms don't return. And that's David Perlmutter, remember, Grain Brain. So for his take on optimal brain performance, you don't want to be any more than 60 or 80 grams a day. Someone who takes it a bit further than that is Professor Tim Noakes, and he says that top athletes shouldn't need more than 200 grams a day. So that'll give you a spectrum to work in. If you're really pushing the envelope with exercise, then yes, you can deal with more carbohydrates. Is it a good thing for long-term health? Well, that's up to you to decide. So now we're going to look at how to count your carbohydrate content. And the simplest way to do that is simply learn whenever you're eating something, and I recommend you do this until you actually can look at something you're thinking of eating and know for sure that you know exactly how many carbohydrates are in that. Then you need to do this until you get to that point of it just being second nature. Like we all had to learn to do arithmetic and learn to count 2 plus 2 and all that kind of stuff. This is just basic stuff. It's like learning English if you're going to talk English. It's learning basic language. So you need to apply the same thing to your carbohydrate knowledge of the carbohydrate contents of your food. And it's not a complicated science, and hopefully this will give you some solid ideas on how to back yourself up this way. So the simplest thing is to Google whatever you're thinking of. Say it's yogurt. So you type in the word yogurt and then follow it with the word nutrition into Google, and you'll get something like this. And I've obviously I've Googled broccoli here. And so I like Google for this because it often gives you a screenshot like that on the right where you'll see broccoli. You'll get a drop-down menu where you can choose how much broccoli am I talking about, and then you can pick whichever amount of broccoli makes sense for what your meal is, you're thinking of for your meal, and then you can see exactly how many carbohydrates are in that. So remember I said to look at the total carbohydrate, not the net or usable carbohydrate. And the reason for that is that fiber can be digested by the bacteria, by your microbiome, to release it as sugars. So that's one reason why you don't want to really think about eliminating fiber. You want to keep the count of fiber there. So you'll see that even things, as I'll show you here, the things that you didn't think got carbohydrate do have quite a bit of carbohydrate. So that's why you need to really pay attention to this piece. And I like to think about it as having a carbohydrate budget. You know how we all have a budget. If we go over it, we know that we're going to go further into debt. And if we stay within it, we know we're going to save some money. So this is the idea of the carbohydrate budget, and the fact that we all have a carbohydrate budget for each of us. And that we need to stick within that budget if we want to get the results we want. Now, the reason I've chosen an apple here is to, again, another tongue-in-cheek, we all know the saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, this is one way that I'm getting you to think differently and think, well, no, maybe that's not true. So if you look at an apple, if you look at a medium-sized apple, you've got about 20 grams of carbohydrate just in a medium-sized apple. And so if your entire carbohydrate budget for the day is 20 grams, then you've blown your budget in one apple. And that's where you have to start to think, is that apple worth blowing my budget for? And that's why we say basically take fruit out of the equation at the beginning of trying out the low carbohydrate diet. Cashews, I used to love cashews. They didn't love me people didn't. If any of you have ever experienced flatulence, farting with cashews, smelly farts, that's what I had. But at the same time, I love them. They're my favorite nut. But you've got to seriously look at the amount of carbohydrates in the nuts. When you're looking at 100 grams of cashews has something like 30 grams of carbohydrate. And, it's 100 grams of cashews is one of those smallish bags. So that's an easy thing to eat. Once I started eating cashews, it's extremely hard to stop eating them. That's another thing you need to look at when you add carbs into your diet, is how much carbohydrate cravings or just hunger cravings those carbs kick in, and it'll be different for different foods. Apples don't kick in as much, or a piece of apple doesn't. I rarely have even pieces of apple now, but they didn't kick in carbohydrate cravings in my earlier days of doing this, like something like cashews did. Onion. Here's a good one about onions, because I wanted to talk to you about vegetables. It's, sometimes it can be a real shock to realize that things like onions have carbohydrates in them, and it's just, in a way, blows your mind sometimes. So you've got to be really careful with vegetables. And the other thing to know about vegetables is when you cook them, you essentially double the carbohydrate content. So, and you'll be able to appreciate that, because if most of us have had raw carrot and we've had cooked carrot, and for sure that when you have cooked carrot, it tastes a lot sweeter, doesn't it, than a raw carrot. Raw carrot, you can hardly taste sweetness, but cooked carrot, well, that's really sweet. Most of us have had that experience. So what's happening there is the cooking is basically pre-digesting some of that fiber, turning it like some bacteria do, changing it into more sugar-based food, so that it's making it more of a digestible carbohydrate. So that's where we say that, any cooking, cabbage, you'll have noticed that as well, with cooking cabbage turns sweeter, whereas raw cabbage is a bit bitter. It's the same process happening. You're turning the previously indigestible fiber by the cooking process into a digestible sugar. And so you just got to be aware of that. And so it's easy to have, how many carbohydrates here? This is like one small onion, and we're looking at 7 grams of carbohydrate for a small onion. And if you cook it, 14 grams of carbohydrate. And if you have, like, say, steak with onion on it, it's really easy to throw a small onion on there, isn't it? Eat that with the steak. So, but all of a sudden you're up to 14 grams of carbohydrate just with that onion. Blueberries, I'll talk about this. If you're in terms of fruits, probably blueberries are the most common one that people say are okay on a low-carb budget. And one of the things I like about blueberries is that you can actually measure, remember I said going up 5 grams a day? You can actually measure 5 grams of blueberries quite easily with it's a quarter cup of blueberries. And so if you're going up and testing your carbohydrate tolerance level, and you want to test it 5 grams a day, then one option you have is for a week, just add a quarter of a cup of blueberries to your daily diet, and then see what those things feel like at the end of that week. The hunger, the waist, like your clothes looseness, the energy levels, all those things are simple things to pay attention to. Now, most of us like a glass of wine. I really don't buy the idea that you need to drink wine for the resveratrol, all those good things that wine's supposed to have in it. You've got to drink a bucket, barrel load of wine really to get any meaningful amount of resveratrol. So I think that's a bit of a wild herring, and I wouldn't buy into that. But who doesn't enjoy drinking? I do. A lot of people don't, but I do, and so I keep it in my budget. So 180 mils of this thing in on the right here, the graphic shows 145 mils, but if you look at 180 mils, that's about 5 grams. So basically I'm looking at 5 gram portions to give you an idea of what things you can add in if you haven't been drinking wine because you've been being clean and good for those first few weeks, and then you want to test out your carbohydrate tolerance level by trying wine, then by all means 180 mils gives you 5 grams, so you know exactly where that stands. And that's the the dry wines. It's not like the Moscatos. and it's definitely not the liqueurs. They're really full of sugar. The thing to watch out for, obviously, with wine is what does it lead to? Can you have just 180? That's like 2 small glasses. Can you have 180 mils of wine in an evening and leave it at that, along with your dinner? Or does that lead to more glasses of wine, or a glass of Drambuie afterwards? Or does it lead to maybe having dessert, or going into the next thing, which is we call chocolate? So you reach for chocolate or some sweet snack after you've had the wine. So how does it basically weaken your resolve? And if it does, then you have to be really, really careful with wine or alcohol of any sort. But wine is a simple thing to use. There are low carbohydrate beers. I don't drink beer. Never really liked it. So you just have to look on the label for those things. Yes, alcohol, things like the whiskies, the gins, if you have them neat or on the rocks, there's sugar, there's the alcohol in there is a carbohydrate, but if you just keep it to small amounts, you're generally fine. It's what you add to them. Like if all of a sudden you add orange juice or pineapple juice, then you've gone way over 5 grams. So you've got to really be discerning on how you're going to manage alcohol here. And chocolate, I love chocolate, and I've really had to learn to manage it. Remember I said I had rosacea? It was one of my inflammatory processes at the beginning. And if I have too much chocolate, my nose starts looking like Belushi Beacon again. It just goes red and pustular, and it's not a pleasant experience, I can tell you. But if you're looking at chocolate, if you want to fit that into a carbohydrate budget, the best way I found to do that is the Lindt 90%. And like one square, there's 10 squares in a block. One square has 1.25 grams of carbohydrate in it. So you can count that, and you can get away with 3 or 4 of those if you don't have rosacea like I do, and still fit it within that 5-gram piece. Another way to do it that I used to love, Lindt did an Arabica. They stopped doing it. But there's other companies that do like coffee chocolate about the same size as the Lindt. In New Zealand, the Whittaker's Supreme Wellington coffee one is like that. Whatever country you're in, you might like to play around with that. And I just love the idea of coffee and chocolate. So I have half a square of the coffee one, like the Arabica, and 1 square of Lindt. That might be my chocolate dose for the day. And that's like got about 4 to 5 grams of, if you have half of a Lindt, that's basically 2.5 grams. And if the coffee, and if you have 1 square of the 90%, that takes it up to 3.75 grams. So say 4 or 5 grams. It's always good to over calculate for yourself so you can keep the carbohydrates down. That's how I fit chocolate into my budget. But again, you have to be aware, what does that chocolate lead you to? So those are just a way you can fit some, it's not about completely losing your ability to eat anything. It's about managing your ability to eat what you want to eat, and what the good things are, the things you really like, but also manage it so it doesn't send you into a tailspin. Now we're going to look at this whole idea of 20 grams a day, and what does that actually look like in terms of just real food. So if you're eating, basically this is just a shot of vegetables. It's got tomatoes and things like that, and carrots that I wouldn't necessarily recommend eating because they're quite high in carb, but it's just there because it's a shot of vegetables. And so if you're looking at broccoli, if you cook a cup of broccoli, you're looking at 6 grams. Half a cup of cooked onions, 5.5 grams. Half a quarter a cup of mushrooms is 1.5 grams. Red pepper, like 1 raw pepper, is like 4 grams. Celery, again uncooked, is like half a cup's 1 gram. Spinach, 2 cups, is 2 grams. So you're looking at a total of 20 grams just in there. So you can see you can have, that's essentially about 2 cups, 2 cups of cooked veggies, and which is quite a bit in some context, and which I'll show you in a minute, and then a couple of cups of salad, really. So that's 20 grams. So you can see I can actually eat quite a lot of vegetables with that 20 grams. And one simple way to even simplify that further is to limit it to 1 cup of cooked above ground veggies, and mixed cooked, 2 cups of salad, and then having meat, chicken, fish, shellfish, and eggs to your heart's content. And and that's a really simple way to eat. And if that works for you, and then if you want to test your carbohydrate tolerance, remember, yeah, I recommend going up to, like David Perlmutter says, up to 60 to 80 grams a day. And this is what 60 grams a day looks like. Remembering it's 5 grams a day, so you try that for a week, and if you're still getting good results, add another 5 grams in the next week. And you don't have to do this if you're doing really fine on the rest. You can just keep it like that. So I've added in the blueberries and the chocolate here, and you can see you've got a little more broccoli, some more cabbage and other vegetables, but you're also adding in almonds. Remember, I've counted them. There's 16 nuts, not a lot of almonds. Remember, cashews are really intense, but 16 almonds has 5 grams, and so I put it in those 5 gram sections for you. 2 squares of that's like regular chocolate more, and then wine, 5 grams. So you can play around with it. So you can see if you can manage 60 grams, then you can do that. But if you can't manage 60 grams and you still want to have your wine and chocolate, then you have to have less vegetables, and that's how you basically play around with that. That's how I did it for many years before I actually went to really minimal vegetables. And the idea is that people think, well, what are you replacing all that, all the calories with? You need energy and things like that. And I don't believe in the calories in, calories out argument, as we've talked about. But you need to replace it with something. And I saw this this blog post, Facebook post actually, from David Perlmutter. He said had this exact picture: a ketogenic diet derives 80 to 90% of calories from fat. And that sounds like a lot of fat, or like your meal is swimming in fat. And so I actually did a breakdown of that. So if you go to this link when you look at the PDF, and basically you'll see that all that means is that if you have like 2 eggs, 2 or 3 slices of bacon, fry those in a teaspoon of lard or something like that, and then you add in a little bit of vegetables, and there you basically have that as an omelette. Sorry, that's not an omelette. So you can do it as an omelette, or you can do it like as fried egg and bacon with a bit of salad and a bit of veggies tossed in the pan. And so when you think about it like that, 2 eggs, a couple of bits of bacon, teaspoon of fat, and veggies, that really doesn't sound like 80 to 90% fat, but it is, because of the fat in the food you're eating. So it's not like you have to add a lot of fat to get that 80 to 90%. You just have to eat good quality food. And as we all know, there's been a big issue with butter being bad for you, and now all of a sudden it's good for you. And so healthy fats is something that's really we need to pay attention to this. We've been told animal fat is bad for us and fish oil is good, but the truth is that animal fats are very good for us, as are fish oils. Plant oils are actually the problem, and you need to be able to figure out the difference between seed oils versus fruit oils. And the idea of a seed oil is like when they talk about sesame seed oil or sunflower oil or canola oil being plant oils, they're really the seed. So they're the seed of the plant that's been crushed to create the oil. Whereas with things like olive oil and coconut oil, then you're really looking at, that is the fruit. It's the olive is the fruit. The coconut, the meat of the coconut is where the oil comes. So that's the fruit side. And there's lots of evidence now that, backed from all sorts of sources, that the seed oils are really, really problematic. Very high in omega-3, very low in omega-6. Other way around, very high in omega-6, very low in omega-3. So they're very inflammatory producing oils. But there is also questions about olive oil and coconut oil. Unless you're actually creating that oil yourself, olive oil is so easily oxidized that that's why they create them in dark bottles. But when you take the top of the olive oil bottle off, then that oxidized oxygen goes into the bottle anyway. And I was in Italy last year, and you can actually buy olive oil that's been done in an environment where there's no oxygen getting into the oil, and it's bottled and canned like that. very expensive oil, and I have actually tried olive oil. With it, basically they take them off the trees, and you can have that olive oil back in 3 days, just with the processing is that fast. And yeah, it's nice, but it doesn't do the same for me in my experience of it as a good quality animal fat. And the same thing with coconut oil. Some people are really big on MCT and coconut oil, and for me, my stomach really just does not like coconut oil at all. So you've got to kind of fit that into how you feel around oils. And you do need to know there is some controversy about olive and coconut oil. There's no controversy about seed and fruit oils. There, seed versus fruit. The seed oils are good to get out of your diet. And olive and coconut oil, you just need to play around with it. Butter, again, healthy. I really don't buy the idea of having butter coffees. You'll see them called keto coffees around in the cafes that are up to speed with that. And there was that whole idea that the coffee guy brought out, which was butter and coconut oil, or in particular MCT oil, in coffee. And you don't actually need to add that much butter in your beginning. And I know for myself, when I have butter coffee, because I have explored all these things, I get mucus in my throat straight after that. So there's something in the proteins that come along with the butter that just really doesn't work for me. And when you cook in butter, most of us have seen butter go brown, as we say we're ready to fry an egg or something. Well, that browning is actually the butter oxidizing. And remember, you don't want oxidized oils. That's what happens with the seed and the fruit and plant oils. You don't want them getting oxidized, because that creates more inflammatory process in your body. So it's really better to cook with something like lard, or in the States they call it tallow, what we call just beef fat over here. So you're really better to, if you're looking at frying, do those. And deep frying, keep that completely out of the question, but a shallow pan fry is fine. And just remember to cook with something that's not going to oxidize like butter. So basically, grass-fed beef, wild fish, free-range chicken, eat those things to satisfaction. Let's talk about the grass-fed and free-range. I think those are optimal, but I don't think they're a requirement. If your budget can't stretch to those, then you're much better to have, non-free-range chicken. And most beef is actually grass-finished. It's just grain-finished. So it's grass-fed, but the last little bit to fatten them up is grain. They've done that for a long time. So it's not all beef is grass-fed right the way through. So I think that's even more tricky to figure out than the chicken. But chicken kept in a coop and not let out, given stacks of hormones and antibiotics, you've got to have some concern about that. But again, you've got to play with it according to your budget. Remember, eliminate seed oils and trans fats, and you don't have to add lots of fat to your diet. You just have to eat all those good quality foods like we mentioned there: the beef, the fish, the chicken. Eat that to your satisfaction. Add a tiny bit of fat, and you'll be getting that. Getting pretty close to that 80 to 90% that David Perlmutter recommends. So this is a slide from Dr. Westman, and he says he treats obesity the same way he treats diabetes, and it's basically that whole process of insulin and about keeping that down. And I like this chart because it's really simple to follow, and it's basically eating meat, poultry, and seafood and eggs to your satisfaction, limiting salad greens to 2 cups a day and vegetables to 1 cup a day. Again, above ground vegetables, he does include squash, which is what we would say pumpkin here. But you can see that's very, very similar to that 20-gram slide I actually talked through before. And in fact, that slide gave you a little more vegetables. And I've done that for years, and then I've gone to eating less and less vegetables, and I actually am really good on less vegetables than that. The thing with dairy is to be wary of it, because there are carbohydrates in dairy, and there's a thing called IGF growth factor, so insulin like growth factor that helps. Dairy was actually built to raise up for cows to actually grow fast, because and grow, the way they want to grow. So, we're a lot, we're not going to get nearly as big as a cow. So think about it that way. And so you really want to limit the cheese. And one simple way to do it that Eric talks about here is limiting it to 4 ounces or 120 grams of cheese. That's like a hard cheese, like a cheddar, those tasty, those hard cheeses. Limit it to that a day. And if you need to measure that out, measure it out, put it in the fridge and in a container, 120 gram blocks, and you can, pick away at it during the day for snacks if you want, but not go over that amount. That helps you not go over the amount rather than just getting the block out and cutting a chunk. And the other thing with cream is like that, what I would call double cream in New Zealand is that thick cream you put in coffee. You want to limit that to 50 mils a day, and 50 mils is small. That's just up for about an ounce and 2/3 of an ounce. An ounce is 30 mils, so the 2/3 of that is the 50 mils. So 1 and 2/3 ounces, whatever that measurement is, so just short of 2 ounces. And you want to limit your if you're having coffee and you're having cream, limit it to that a day. Or if you're having blueberries, remember 5 grams of blueberries with some cream, then limit it to 50 mils. While you're going through this process of being really clear that you're getting low enough to actually make the difference. Last thing on this section I wanted to show you, this is Diabetic Cookery back in 1917. Think about that. Why 1917? Because this is before they found the drug insulin and were able to give it to diabetics. And it's really interesting that if you look at this list, it's very, very similar to exactly what we've been eating. Eat as much as you want of the eggs, meat, and cheese. Interesting, the different kind of meats they used to have back then. Tongue, I remember us having tongue in the 60s. It's really rare to have that now. But, again, above ground veggies. It's funny to see Crisco in there, that first oil that actually got butter out of tried to shunt butter out to the side of our diet, and that's where those vegetable oils really come in. Seed oils, I would really warn you against those. They didn't know about that back then. But apart from that, it's essentially the diet they're teaching diabetics to use in 1917 is the same as what this whole section has been about, and it's the whole reason to keep carbohydrates low, so you don't stimulate insulin and then create a problem. And so basically, it's funny when you think about it that we've been taken all this time to get back to what we knew was right, 100 years ago now, and that's it's a frightening indictment of nutritional science and the curly path we've been led down, and finally being brought back to better ways of eating. In the next series, I'm going to go through the 30-day resets from carnivore to vegan. So it's like showing you how to do the 20 grams a day or the low carbohydrate diet with different food approaches.